I wasn't home when it happened. That's how it started. An HOA board member walked onto my property without permission, claiming she had the right to inspect it. No notice, no consent, just confidence. She opened gates. She took photos. She stepped farther in like the land belonged to her. When I confronted her, she didn't leave. She argued. She insisted. She refused. That's when I made one call. And minutes later, the tone changed completely. Because trespassing isn't an HOA violation. It's a crime. And when the sheriff arrived, she didn't walk off my property. She was escorted off in handcuffs. The property had always been quiet. Set back from the road, fenced properly, clearly marked. Nothing about it suggested shared space or community access. I'd owned it for years, maintained it carefully, and never had a single dispute over boundaries. Neighbors kept to themselves. I kept to mine. The HOA, until recently, did the same. They handled the usual things: newsletters, landscaping reminders, parking notes. I followed the rules that applied to me and ignored the rest. There was no reason for conflict and no history of it. That changed when the HOA elected a new board member. She was vocal, confident, very sure of her authority. She talked often about standards, about compliance, about making sure everyone followed the rules exactly as written or as she interpreted them. At first, it was just emails, general reminders, vague references to inspections, notes about upcoming reviews of properties for consistency. Nothing that singled me out, nothing that required action. Then I started noticing unfamiliar activity near my land. A gate left unlatched. Footprints where there shouldn't have been any. Photos taken from angles no one needed unless they were already inside the property line. Still, no notice, no request, no permission, just the growing sense that someone was testing how far they could go. I checked the HOA documents. I checked the property records. The boundaries were clear. The HOA had no jurisdiction past the street-facing edge of my land. That's why what happened next wasn't just surprising. It was a line being crossed. Because the day the HOA board member decided to inspect my property without permission, she wasn't enforcing a rule. She was stepping into something she had absolutely no right to touch. The first confirmation came from a neighbor. They called me while I was away and asked why someone from the HOA was walking around my property. At first, I thought they must be mistaken. Then they described her, clipboard in hand, phone out, moving deliberately through areas that were clearly fenced and marked private. I checked my security cameras. She had entered through the side gate, not hesitantly, not by accident. She opened it, stepped inside, and began walking the perimeter like she'd done it before. She stopped to take photos. She bent down to examine the ground near the fence. At one point, she tried a door to an outbuilding and wrote something down when it didn't open. I emailed the HOA immediately. I told them no one had permission to enter my property. I cited the boundaries. I attached screenshots from the cameras. The response came back an hour later, and it wasn't apologetic. They said inspections were part of maintaining community standards. They said the board had authority to verify compliance. They said no damage had been done, so there was no issue. That's when the situation escalated. The next day, she came back. This time, I was home. I watched her walk up, open the gate again, and step onto my land without even looking around. I confronted her immediately and told her to leave. I explained that she was trespassing and that any concerns needed to be handled through written notice. She didn't leave. She told me she had the right to be there. She said inspections didn't require permission. She insisted the property fell under HOA oversight, even though the documents clearly said otherwise. When I told her to leave again, she refused. She said if I interfered with an inspection, there could be consequences. She said she was documenting my non-cooperation. She continued taking photos while standing several feet inside my property line. At that point, the situation stopped being about rules. It became about safety. A stranger, no matter how official she thought she was refusing to leave my land after being told to do so. I warned her one final time. I told her she was trespassing and needed to exit immediately. She laughed. She said I was overreacting. She said calling law enforcement would only make things worse for me. That's when I stepped away, took out my phone, and made the call she didn't believe I would. And while she kept writing notes and taking pictures, completely convinced she was untouchable, the clock was already ticking on the biggest mistake she'd made since joining the HOA. The sheriff arrived faster than she expected. A patrol vehicle pulled up along the road, lights off but unmistakable. The moment she noticed it, her posture changed. The confidence drained from her face as the deputy stepped out and asked a single, simple question. "Who authorized you to be on this property?" She launched into an explanation. HOA authority, inspections, community standards. She spoke quickly, confidently, like this was a misunderstanding that would be cleared up in seconds. The sheriff didn't interrupt. He listened. He asked where the written permission was. He asked whether the homeowner had asked her to leave. I answered that question for him. I told him I had repeatedly asked her to leave. I showed him the camera footage from the previous day. I pointed out the posted private property signs and the locked gate she had opened herself. The sheriff's tone shifted. He explained, very plainly, that HOA authority does not override property law. He told her that once a property owner asks someone to leave, they are legally required to do so. He told her that refusing turns a misunderstanding into criminal trespass. She tried to argue. She said she was just doing her job. She said the HOA gave her authority. She said she didn't think the rules applied this way. The sheriff cut her off. He told her intent didn't matter. He told her she had been warned. And he told her she was now being detained for trespassing. The moment the handcuffs came out, the reality finally hit. She stopped talking. The clipboard slipped from her hand as the sheriff calmly placed her wrists behind her back. Neighbors had begun watching from a distance, drawn by the patrol car and the raised voices. She was escorted off my property the same way she'd entered it. Only this time she didn't walk freely. As the sheriff led her away, he turned back and told me the report would reflect exactly what happened. He said I'd done the right thing by calling. He said property boundaries exist for a reason. And just like that, the inspection was over. Not because the HOA decided it was, but because the law did. The aftermath was quiet. No follow-up inspections, no emails about compliance, no attempts to justify what had happened. Later that evening, I received a brief message from the HOA's management company. It said the board member had been removed from inspection duties pending review. It said the HOA would no longer conduct in-person property inspections without written notice and homeowner consent. There was no apology, but the change in tone was unmistakable. Within days, the HOA issued an update clarifying property boundaries and reminding board members that entry onto private land without permission was prohibited. The language was careful, legal, clearly written by someone who understood exactly how close they'd come to a much bigger problem. Neighbors reached out quietly. Some thanked me, others admitted they'd experienced similar pressure, but never thought they could push back. A few said seeing the sheriff arrive made them realize how easily authority can be confused with permission. As for me, the gates stayed locked, the signs stayed posted, and the cameras stayed on. The HOA never set foot on my property again. The lesson wasn't about winning an argument or embarrassing someone in power. It was about knowing where the line is and what happens when someone crosses it. HOAs can enforce rules. They cannot ignore the law. And sometimes, the clearest way to remind people of that isn't another email or meeting. It's letting the sheriff explain it for you,